On. All right, so today we're going to talk about tough perennials for sun, and we'll start off right off the bat is bursting the perennial bubble. There aren't any plants that don't require any maintenance. All plants require maintenance. I lived in the desert, in the Atacama Desert in Chile for 2 years, and even in the middle of the desert, when nobody even had a lawn, they just had either concrete or dirt, they still had maintenance. They would still be ladies and men out there sweeping their dirt. They would still be sweeping off their concrete to keep it clean. If you have a garage or a patio, you're still cleaning off that concrete or that deck. So everything requires maintenance. So if you plant something, you are going to have to do some maintenance. Unfortunately, that's how it is in today with anything, especially with living things. So a little bit of basics about perennials, and this works with pretty well all plants, is you want to know your site. What about your soil? Is it wet or dry, clay or sand, fertile or sterile, loose or like concrete? All of these things about the site are going to go into deciding what perennials, what plants are going to do the best for you. If you can match your plants with your site, your life is going to be a lot easier. If you're trying to fight Mother Nature all the time and trying to grow a plant in clay that likes to be growing in the sandy soil and a loose sandy soil, you're going to be having to constantly amend it, constantly add things, take things away, and it's going to make your life a lot more complicated and difficult to do. So if you put the right plant in the right place to begin with, your life is a lot easier. It's better for the plant, easier on you, and usually even easier on the planet because there's a lot less things you're having to add, fertilizers, chemicals, pesticides, all those other things you're going to have to add to get that plant to grow well. So look at all these factors, and these can vary around your yard. You may have some spots that stay wet, some spots that stay dry. So these will vary across your yard. If you have a newer home, some of your area is probably compacted. If you like concrete, here's one with a jackhammer trying to do some work in the yard, and that's just soil. Other things to consider is how much light you're getting. Around your yard, it's going to be different all over. You're going to have some spots that get more sun, some that more shade, some that get afternoon sun, some that get morning sun, some that are really shady. So this is going to change. And this can also change over time. When you design your garden, especially if you design a new garden, like in our children's garden, when we designed it, there wasn't a tree in the garden. We put over 50 trees inside the garden, but when we first started, everything was full sun. Now, almost 10 years later, we're getting to the point that about another 5-10 years, everything's going to be in full shade because we put so many trees in there to provide shade for the children and everything. So our plant palette is changing as the trees mature. So things can change, or you add a new addition onto your house that changes your light. Things can change over time. Bed preparation. You want to test your soil. You want to test it for fertility. So take a soil test down to your extension office. See what minerals or nutrients you might need to add. Test the drainage. Dig a hole in your yard, fill it up with water, let it drain and fill it up again, and see how long that water stays in there. I have some spots that are compacted at the Arboretum that I've planted wisteria or different things, and they've died, and I'm like, well, why'd that die? And I go to pull them out of the ground, and they're sitting in a basin of water. Basically, like I tried to do a water garden because the hole I dug is basically now a water fountain. It's sat there in water. That plant has sat in water for months. Organic matter. Do you have any? Do you need to add more? These are all things you want to do before you plant your perennials. Perennials are long-term, long-growing plants, so they're going to be there for a long time. So any changes, amendments that you need to do before you plant them because it's really hard to do it after they're growing. The biggest one, other than amendments, is eliminating weeds. If you do a good job eliminating the weeds before you plant, your life is going to be a million times easier than if you wait or do just a okay job of eliminating them and then plant. There are a lot of ways to do this. You can do herbicides, black plastic, lay down newspapers or cardboard and put mulch on top. Give it some time to kill those things. You want to get and make sure that you have a good weed kill before you plant anything or before you make these beds. I had some friends of mine, they started a strawberry bed. They tilled up a section of their yard. A week or two later, they planted their strawberries. 2 weeks after that, their entire strawberry bed is now a grass and strawberry bed. They spent the entire summer trying to weed the grass out of the strawberry bed. They eventually put newspaper and wood chips down. Of course, the grass by that time it had regrown. And eventually they gave up, pulled the wood chips and the wood newspaper out, and they went back to grass. And unfortunately, that is what happens a lot. It happens for me. It happens for a lot of people. If we really rush our weed control, then we pay for it. And you pay for it by weeding and weed problems for a long time, and often to the point that you just give up on that spot and you start over. So weed control, getting a good weed control before you plant and before you put these things in is essential. All right, so planting. The essential steps to planting: you want to get your plants, you want to test them out. If you buy them all at the same time or get them all at the same time, you can kind of set them out in your area and see how you like how they're placed. You want to water them in, dig the planting holes. This kind of shows you its graph on how to dig the planting holes. The couple of things, a couple tips. The best thing you can do is after you plant them is water them in. I tell my guys this, I tell my class, people that go to class that I teach, the same thing. The single most important thing you can do when you're planting a plant is water it in. Even if it's going to rain that night or the next day or an hour after you get done, or even if it's raining while you're planting, you want to water those plants in. That settles the soil. It gets those plants the water they need right off the bat, because after being pulled out of the pot, you've exposed the roots different and shocked them and all sorts of things. The single most important thing you can do is watering that plant in after you plant it. I've found that out hundreds of times. If I don't plant it in, that plant will probably still survive if I do a decent job of taking care of it, but it recovers, it performs better if I water it in after planting. And then with mulch, a lot of your perennials, mulch is great for weed control. A lot of your perennials don't like a lot of mulch or a heavy mulch. They will need it pulled away from the crown. There's some like daylilies you can mulch as much as you want, and they will love it. They're great. They grow along ditches and things. They like being wet and moist all the time. But a lot of your perennials, they like to be dry around the crowns. And so you're going to want to pull that mulch away from the crowns. Yes, that's going to give you an area that you're going to have to weed, but it'll be better for your perennials. Selecting plants. All right. So we're almost to the plant choices, but for what I consider a lower maintenance perennial is what the things below. It has a lifespan of 5 or more years. There's quite a few perennials that you can buy and get that are beautiful, but they don't last a long time. Cardinal flower is one of those I've planted over and over again, and cardinal flower lasts maybe 2 to 3 years before you lose it. If you don't let it reseed, it's gone. And there's some of the black-eyed Susans that are that way, that if you don't allow it a spot to reseed, it vanishes after a couple years. I have patches of black-eyed Susans that the patch grows and contracts every year depending on who I have weed it. If I weed it, it's a bigger patch. If I have one of my students weed it, they weed out half the seedlings and the patch gets smaller. Luckily, nobody's that super thorough when they weed. And so usually there's some seedlings that survive and they go on to the next year. But there's some of those that are short-lived perennials. And like cardinal flower and some of the black-eyed Susan, some of those are short-lived perennials. If you want it to be lower maintenance, you want a long span perennial, 5 or more years. You want to make sure it's cold hardy. You don't want it living for 2 or 3 years, and then we get a real Kentucky winter and it dying on you. Especially for us here in Kentucky, it needs to be able to handle the heat and humidity. We get hot and humid in the summer times. And a lot of our perennials, especially the stuff that's growing native to the deserts, they can handle the cold just fine, and they could even handle the heat. It's mostly the humid and the nighttime temperatures that messes them up. You want one that doesn't require frequent division. Like a lot of daylilies, every 2-3 years, you probably need to divide them a little bit or they'll start to go downhill. I don't like deadheading. I despise deadheading. I don't like to do it. I don't usually have the time to do it. So pick those plants that do well even without deadheading or require maybe just a light trim once a year. Don't require staking. Staking is time intensive and takes a lot of time, effort, energy, expense to do, and to do well and make it look natural. And lastly, and this is a really important one, is insect and disease resistance. You want to find the most disease resistant, insect resistant plants that you can find to put in your gardens. If you'll do this, your life will be easier, you'll have less issues, and the plants will grow better. So we will now get into the plants, and I'm sure that's what you're all waiting for. And the first one on my list is the Moonshine Achillea or Moonshine Yarrow. There are a lot of yarrows, and most of them do well. Moonshine I really like as a yarrow, and it's a really tough one. It has bigger leaves. It's a little bit more stout plant than most of the other yarrows. I like, and it's in yellow. It's most of the other yarrows, the Achillea millefolium, most of those are whites, pinks, purples. This one comes in a bright yellow, has a larger fern-like foliage, and blooms in the summertime, blooms for a long time. The pollinators love it. It's an easy to grow plant, very little maintenance. On mine, the only maintenance I really do to them is in the fall or early in the spring. I'll cut them back to 6 inches tall, and that's the only maintenance they get. The rest of the year, it's just weed once around them once in a while. They fill in pretty well. So low maintenance. You can see here with the salvia in the background, the yellow and the purple grow great together. They can work in a lot of other areas as well. But it's a really nice yarrow to have in your yard, a nice perennial to put in your yard. So another one is the willow leaf blue star. This one, for the most of the year, looks like the picture you see below. It's just kind of the very light willow-like leaves, ferny-like leaves. In the spring, it will bloom blue. The flowers aren't super showy. They're not out for very long, maybe a week or a couple weeks. Most people don't even notice them. But most of the season, it is this ferny-like foliage that grows great with other plants. It's a great companion plant. And it is super tough. It takes a little while to get it established. You're going to plant it, and for the first 2 or 3 years, it's not going to look like a whole lot. But once it gets established, there's not much you can do to kill this plant. You can chop it down in the middle of summertime, spray around it with Roundup, and it's got a big enough. If you've ever dug up an Amsonia crown underneath the ground, it is almost like a tree trunk underneath there. It's super big and woody and hard. You have to divide it. You have to use a saw or an axe to divide the crowns. So not super easy to divide. Most of the time I don't divide them. I just leave them where they're at. But a beautiful, really, really tough, hardy perennial. In the fall it's probably its peak season of interest. It has kind of a straw yellow color that'll cover all of those leaves. Looks awesome in the fall, mixed in with some of your asters and other things. It looks great. It is really just a really tough accent plant, companion plant to put in your perennial beds that has that nice kind of really delicate foliage. So another fall blooming one, the Japanese anemone. There are a bunch of different hybrids. Robustissima is probably one of the oldest ones that I've seen, and probably one of the hardiest ones. There's a bunch of newer ones. We've grown some of the newer ones with some success, some failures, and this is another one of those that it takes a little while to get established. The first year or two, it doesn't look like a lot. It'll bloom some, but once it gets established, there is no killing this plant. And that's something you need to think about when you're planting it. With like the Robustissima anemone, it's going to be there probably after you're gone. We have plants that were planted over 20 years ago at the Arboretum, and those beds are no longer there. Those plantings have been removed. They've been totally renovated. Everything has been gone, but some of those anemones are still there. I have hand weeded them out. I've sprayed them out. I've covered them over. I've done everything to get rid of them, and 20 years later, they're still there. Most of them are still hiding now. They've been pushed back to underneath the boxwoods, but they'll still crawl out from underneath the boxwoods and show up every fall and bloom. But they're going to be there a long time. And that can be a drawback if you want to switch out your beds often. Maybe this isn't the plant for you, but if you want to put a plant like in my parents' yard, I put stuff like this. My parents are school teachers. They're really busy. So they have a lot of stuff to do. So they need plants in their perennial bed and their flower beds that they don't have to baby, that they don't have to worry about. And literally there's nothing they can do to really kill these plants. They're going to be there no matter what they do. And they will crowd out, push out the weeds and other things around them. They don't really care what weeds are there. They will push those out of the way because they're vigorous enough. This is one of those plants. So it blooms, and like I said, in the fall, it can do full sun, this one into part shade. And you can get this in different heights. The Robustissima is more 3 to 4 feet. Some of the new ones like Whirligig are 1 to 2. There's Pocahontas. There's a bunch of newer ones that stay more about the 2 to 3. But look into those. We've had some success with some of the newer ones, but Robustissima is a super, super, super tough one of these. All right, the false indigos. Another one, while we're in that group, that it takes a while to establish. When you buy these things, especially like me, I usually get them in as liners. So they come in a tray of like 20 or 30. They don't look like anything. They're like one little stalk in a liner. And for the first year or two, I have to just kind of make sure that they don't get pulled out as weeds and they don't get just trampled on. But 2 or 3 years after you get them started, there's no stopping these things. They have a huge, dense crown. I don't recommend dividing them. You can. To divide them, you'd have to use a saw or an axe or something really hard or a really sharp shovel. They make that really woody, tough crown. On the right there is the picture of the one blooming. That's pink lemonade. There's a bunch of them. There's cherries jubilee, pink lemonade. There's hundreds of cultivars. All the cultivars seem to do well, equally well. So you can get it red, brown, purple, pink, blue, white, all sorts of different colors. They've hybridized most of these. So they're using some of the white wild indigo, the cream wild indigo, the yellow wild indigo, the blue wild indigo, and they've mixed all of the genetics up. So you get all sorts of crazy colors. The seed pods are kind of interesting. You see them on the other picture. You can see those black seed pods that will form in the fall. And you can trim those out if you don't like that look. And then with them trimmed out, you just have this green kind of almost bush-like looking thing that's 3 to 4 feet tall through the rest of the summertime. Another taller plant, but it is a hard to kill once you get it established. And when it's in bloom, it is an amazing plant as well. And it really attracts the pollinators. Okay, onto a short plant. This one is the Threadleaf Coreopsis. The Coreopsis Moonbeam is this cultivar. There are several of the Threadleaf Coreopsises that do well. There's several of the other Coreopsises that do well, that do great as well. This one only gets 1 to 2 foot tall. It is more of a spreading perennial. And full sun, it blooms in the summer. This one is mostly, you would divide it by, propagate it by dividing. Has this nice buttercream kind of yellow. There are quite a few of the Threadleaf Coreopsises. Moonbeam seems to be one of those that more stays longer. A lot of the Threadleaf Coreopsis I've seen, they do well for 3 or 4, maybe 5 years, and they kind of peter out. This one seems to stay there for a longer time. That being said, Coreopsis, and especially the Threadleaf, they like a drier site. So if you're going to mulch, this is definitely one of those. You don't want to put a heavy mulch around it or you will suffocate it out. It doesn't like its crown staying moist and wet. It likes to dry out. If you remember, it's native to the prairies, areas that are a little bit drier and stay dry. So don't use a heavy mulch on this one and you'll have a lot better luck on keeping it around. So let's go to the next one. The Oxeye Sunflower or Oxeye. It's Heliopsis helianthoides. There are quite a few cultivars of this. Oxeye. There is even a variegated one we have. We've got a variegated one. We've got one that's a double. That's got a lot of petals on it. You can get them in all sorts of types, but even just the straight wild type that you can find out in pastures and things, it is a really tough plant. Again, this is a taller one, 3 to 5 feet tall. Full sun, blooms in late summer. This one, if you're just doing the straight wild type like you'd find in your pastures or in prairies, you could propagate it by the seed. If you're doing a cultivar like Oxeye or any of the other ones, you would have to do those by either a cutting or a division. So this one is great for pollinators. It's great for the birds. They really like to eat the seeds. And it is just a great plant, a great plant to have in most of these you'd probably put in the back, farther back in the bed. but it is super hardy, super tough, and it will spread a little bit and perform really well for you over time. Okay, so now to a lot of people's, and this seems to be the new wave, is everybody loves the hardy hibiscus. If you've seen these or seen demonstrations of these flowers are huge. They're the size of dinner plates. They bloom. You can get them in white, pink, red, purple. Unfortunately, there's no yellows or blues yet or oranges, but white, pink, red, purple. And there's hybrids. You can get straight species of this, and they will grow just as well. They grow as well, and they're native. The swamp hibiscus and the scarlet hibiscus. The scarlet hibiscus is a big, tall, 6 to 8 foot tall, red one with red leaves, or not red leaves, red flowers. And the swamp hibiscus is usually white, but you can also find it in kind of a pinkish to almost a purplish color, scattered around. And they've used those two, maybe a couple other ones, and combined the genetics to get this plant that has huge flowers, dinner plate size flowers. They're still going crazy. The breeders and horticulturists are going crazy with the breeding on this one. They've bred these to have red leaves, purple leaves. They've bred them to have purple stems now. They have all sorts of different colors. There's short ones now that only get 3 to 4 feet tall. There's still some like Lord Baltimore that get like 8 feet tall. Lord Baltimore is an old red one. There are dozens and dozens of cultivars. That's why I didn't list any here, is because they're coming up with new ones all the time. We've tried out a lot of them. The only disclaimer I would say to this one and the issues that we've had in the past is that it blooms at almost the wrong time of the year. It usually starts blooming the first week in July. And for us at the Arboretum and at my house, first week of July is usually when our June bugs, the green June bugs, and the Japanese beetles emerge. And they love to eat on these flower petals. So for the first couple of weeks, the flowers, which should be beautiful and huge, are kind of shriveled up and missing pieces because the June bugs, Japanese beetles, are chomping them to bits. But after the first couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, the Japanese beetles have moved on to laying their eggs. The June bugs, the same thing. It still is blooming and continues through August and into September. And so for the rest of the summer, it looks great, has these huge flowers. But for us, where we don't apply pesticides for our June bugs and beetles, we lose a couple of weeks of our blooms because of them. And also, I think even on this picture, you can see it, they will also eat holes in the leaves. So the leaves and the things can look a little bit ratty for a couple of weeks, but they usually recover quickly. They're super vigorous and bloom great the rest of the summertime. As we've gotten better with our biological control for Japanese beetles and June bugs, we're getting better. Our season's getting longer and longer for these. We've added a lot of pollinator plants, and that's brought in the blue line wasp and other ones that will predate on June bugs, Japanese beetle larvae. That's helping us to get a better season. But these plants are amazing. If you have a big group of these growing together, it will stop the cars. It'll stop your neighbors. Everybody will be asking what these are. They are amazing, wonderful, huge blooms that are showstoppers in the garden. Do great as a pot as well. It's a really tough plant. This is a perennial. So even though the stems on like Lord Baltimore may get to like 8 foot tall and bloom clear up that tall, they will die down to the ground every year. And you'll cut them down to 4 to 6 inches tall. And the next spring, they will come back from the ground, not from that little stem that you left, and produce and bloom again. So it is an amazing plant to have in your garden. Another one of my favorite ones. This is Walker's Lowcat Mint. And it is one of my favorites because it is reliable. It can take almost anything once you put it in the ground. A year or so later, it is pushed out all the competition. It will spread 2 to 3 feet wide and about the same height, and it blooms all summer long. And the good thing about this one, it is vigorous enough that when it blooms, that the leaves, the stems underneath it will push up and put new buds on, and they will bloom over the old ones. And so you're not constantly deadheading. There's a lot of like your salvia, your meadow sage, that it will bloom great, but then you have to deadhead and then it'll bloom again and then you have to deadhead. This one, you don't need to deadhead until maybe the end of the year. Usually I don't deadhead mine at all. It pretty well will bloom clear up until frost and even up until the freeze. And so I just cut mine back in the fall or in the spring, and that's the only really maintenance it gets. It is 2 to 3 foot tall, like I said, full sun. This one, if you're doing a cultivar, you can do by cuttings, and most often you do this by cuttings. You can divide these as well. To the next one, which is Dark Towers Foxglove Beard Tongue. Now, if that isn't a mouthful, you really need to find a better name for this one. Scientific name is Penstemon digitalis. Dark Towers, which basically means beard tongue, foxglove, dark towers. It is a penstemon, but looks like a lot like a foxglove. This one, it can be dark towers. Red Husker is just as good. I'm not even sure I could tell you the difference if I had the two growing side by side, but most of the time from a distance, you can't tell the difference apart. It is descended from our native Penstemon digitalis. Dark Towers has that red foliage on it, that as you see in the picture, that burgundy or red foliage. Red Husker has that kind of same red burgundy foliage. It's probably just not as dark as Dark Towers is. It grows upright, will have a pink bloom. These ones, all you're seeing is the seed heads. All those little triangles are the seed capsules. And they don't bloom too terribly long. They'll bloom in like May or June. So most of the time you're looking at the foliage and seed capsules. If they do get leggy, or you get tired of looking at the look that you have here, and often I do, by August or September, I will prune them back down to the base, about maybe 3 to 4 inches tall. The basal rosette will flush back out, and it'll just look like a nice perennial with red, purplish, or red burgundy leaves. Propagation on this one, it'll be division. If you're doing the cultivars, if you're doing straight species, they propagate pretty readily by seed. Those seed capsules, and even if you have red huskers will propagate. You can do red huskers by seed. I have it, sometimes it'll jump around the garden from the seed, the red huskers will. Dark Towers will do the same thing. It's a newer one. It's been out maybe 5-10 years. The height on these is 2 to 3 foot tall. They can handle some of the wetter sites. The straight species we have down in the wetlands, it does real well there. I have it in some of the drier sites. It does equally as well. So it's a really great one. See this one, it's in a pot with a juniper. It doesn't get watered all that often. It still performs and does well and survives in this pot and this planter that gets watered. And that's one of the reasons I put it in there. We used to have tropicals and annuals in these pots, and I would have to water them daily all summer long, have to come in on Saturday, Sunday, 4th of July, holidays, weekends, every day to water these pots. I got tired of that. I got got old. You can see all the gray hair. So we put junipers in them and Camerocypris, and put some perennials in them, and put perennials in them that can handle a little bit drier. So these mostly get watered with the rainwater. Once in a while, if we get 2 or 3 weeks in the summertime when it's hot and it doesn't rain, we will water these maybe once a week. But other than that, they can handle really, really dry areas as well. So really great plant for really tough sites. All right, quintessential mall perennial here. If you go to the malls, you'll see these all over. Goldstrom's been out a long time. And there's some new ones. There's a baby Goldstrom, I think. There's a couple new ones that are about as well. American Gold Star, I think, is a brand new one that we just tried, and I like it quite a bit. The Goldstrom you can find anywhere, but if you need a really tough perennial, this is a great one. It does great in a lot of different areas. Remember, this one is native to the prairies. So again, don't mulch it too heavily or you will get some dieback. You can get some fungal issues. But if you keep a low mulch on it and keep the area that's at drier, so if you have a drier site, this would work great. Height 2 to 3 feet, likes full sun. Bloom time is it will bloom pretty well all summer long. It usually doesn't need a lot of deadheading. You can deadhead it. It'll make it look a little bit cleaner. And it can go through little spells where it's mostly bloomed out. You can deadhead it or cut it back a little bit and it'll bloom out some more. That often in August, September, I'll do that on some of ours, especially in the showier areas, is I will go in, cut them back to about 4 to 6 inches tall, wait 2 or 3 weeks, and it will flush back out with new growth, new flowers, and go again. So this is another one of those really tough perennials, really great to add, and it adds a lot of color. And also the bees, even the birds like to eat the seeds. In the late summer, I don't cut them back because the birds love to eat the seeds that are in these. Okay, so that brings us back down to a goldenrod. There are several goldenrods. I'm going to talk about fireworks. So there's quite a few of the new ones that are pretty good. And if you look, there's 2 pictures there and they don't look alike. And the reason why is one of those, the one with green flowers, is ragweed, your common ragweed. When goldenrod is in bloom, so is the ragweed. Everybody always freaks out and says, goldenrod, that kills my allergies. It's the ragweed. Ragweed never gets the blame because if you look at ragweed, nobody could tell it's blooming. It's got those green flowers on green foliage, and so nobody sees it's blooming, but it blooms at the same time as the goldenrod. So goldenrod gets a lot of negative hype, negative press because of ragweed. Its pollen's too big, and it doesn't, it could cause allergies, but most of the allergies that are caused that season are caused by ragweed. All right, now that I'm done with that soapbox, fireworks is a really great goldenrod. It's been out a long time, at least 20, 30 years. I've been growing it probably over 20 years. It is one of those that doesn't seed around your garden. It will spread a little bit. You plant it, it'll spread out a couple of feet from where you plant it. So it'll, this planting here, you see, I think that was about 30 plants I planted. Wanted a wave of goldenrod, so I planted like 30 plants as liners. 3 or 4 years later, it's a nice spread. It's not taking over the rest of the bed. It's not reseeding all over the garden. There's a lot of the goldenrods that are really weedy and seedy. They will seed all over and you'll see them popping up all over your beds. This one doesn't do that. This one stands up. There is some that fall down a lot. The, was it Golden Cascade? There is Solidago shorty eye. There's forgetting the cultivar, but it falls over all the time. I used to like it a lot. I'm kind of over it because it's always falling over. This one stands up no matter the rain, no matter the weather. It's sturdy, it stays standing up. It fills in nice, grows great. This one, there's a few asters. You can see a little bit of pink there. I should have probably put more fall blooming stuff or maybe some anemones with it. But even as a solid wave of yellow, it still looks great. With fireworks, it can get rust in the fall. So usually about the time, especially if we have a wet fall, sometimes we get a dry fall and then it's all right. But if we get a wet fall, it will get rust. And so the leaves on this one, if you look at the picture, there's almost no leaves left, just flowers, because the leaves have got that orange rust and it's turned the leaves to brown and the leaves have wilted and fallen off. That can be a problem if we get a really wet fall. But other than that, even with that, you still don't notice it a lot. You see all those yellow leaves or yellow flowers, so you don't notice it. Like I said, great pollen source for the wasp, for the bees, butterflies, for monarchs, where they're needing pollen to get going. So really great source for them. Blooms in the fall with the asters and anemones. If you're going to do straight species on the Solidago, you can do it by seed. If you want like fireworks or Golden Cascade or any of the other cultivars, you're going to want to do that by division. Okay, another native one, and this is a tall one. You got the Joe Pye weed, the Eutrochium fistulosum. I should have put a T in there after fist. There's a T in there. It used to be Eupatorium, and I think before that it had a different name. I used to know the other name. They keep changing this one's genus. But Joe Pye weed is a beautiful plant. It's a tall plant, but really beautiful pink blooms, taller. Gateway is a really good one that I like a lot. Little Joe is a shorter one. There is Baby Joe, which gets 2 to 3 feet. If I remember right, Little Joe gets 3 to 4 feet. Gateway gets more about 5 to 8 feet. So there's a bunch of different sizes, so you can find one that fits for your garden. They all equally grow about the same. The smaller ones are not quite as vigorous as the taller ones, and that's why they're smaller. So they may not be able to not grow quite or be quite as tough, but they will give you that height that you might need in your garden. Bloom times, usually in late summer to fall. Loves full sun. It can handle a deeper mulch. If you see it growing in the wild, you'll see this growing alongside of the wetlands and swamps and things. So it handles wetter areas, wetlands. If you're growing, again, if you're growing straight species like you'd find in the wild, you can do that by seed. They propagate pretty easily by seed. You can divide them if you want a cultivar. But a really great, pretty well trouble-free, great pollinator plant for your yard. And a real showstopper. You put these in and people, they see that giant pink bloom. This picture, I mean, those bloom heads, yeah, the plant might get 6 to 8 feet tall, but those bloom heads sometimes are 1 foot to 2 foot almost long, covered in those pink blossoms. So really great addition for the back of your border, or like Baby Joe. That one can go even up into your front of your border. Okay, Siberian Iris. This is the irises kind of went come and go, but Siberian Iris is one of my really tried and true irises that I love. It's a tough little puppy. You can put it almost anywhere. It can handle even into part shade. This is a cultivar called Purple Flame. It's a new one. When it emerges in the spring, it comes out with that purple foliage, and as it ages, it turns to green. It would be great if it kept that purple foliage all year, and I'm guessing probably in another 5-10 years, they'll probably have a new one that keeps that foliage all year. But for now, Purple Flame, it emerges purple like that, so it looks great in your early spring ephemeral beds, adds color into those beds, and a lot of interest. But even like Cesar's Brother or a lot of the other ones, these come in purple flowers, white flowers, and I think I've seen a couple pink ones, but mostly white and purple. But they're really tough. They can handle those tough kind of wetter areas, but they can handle a lot of drier areas as well. So if I have, and in the gardens, if I have a tough spot and I'm not sure what I want to put there or what was going to do the best there, often I will go to my standby, and that's the Siberian Iris. I'll go to Cesar's Brother or one of those and divide them. They're easy to divide almost any time of the year. I wouldn't divide them when they're in full bloom, but other than that, you can dig out a piece of that, half of that, move it somewhere else, and they just do great. Don't have really any issues. Red Hot Poker. It is Coneflower. There is a bunch of cultivars. I'm not going to try to list them. The one that's reddish with yellow, that is Flamenco, but they've got some new yellow ones. They've got some of all sorts of different variations between red and yellow and kind of a cream color. It is a really great plant for the summertime. The hummingbirds love them. The hummingbird moths love them as well. They get about 2 to 3 foot tall. Look pretty tropical. They look like almost a desert plant, but with those really great leaves, they look pretty tropical. They bloom in the summertime and pretty well throughout the summertime. This one is one of those you could deadhead. I don't deadhead them a lot. Once in a while, if they start getting a lot of those stalks, they'll bloom once on that stalk and they'll put up a new stalk. And so after that stalk is done, you pull it out. You can pull that out, or turn dry. You can pull it out and put in some new ones. And so that makes it simple and easy. Like I said, blooms in the summer, most of the summer, easy to divide and add into your garden. Another one for your garden is the Anise Hyssop, Agastache funiculum. Funiculum. Sheesh. There is a tough one to say, but the Anise Hyssop is a great pollinator plant. We have these in our perennial teaching garden, and when they're in bloom, it is a pollinator magnet. We have kids out there with butterfly nets, chasing the little skippers around, the skipper moths, chasing the bees and the other butterflies. They are all over this plant, and it is especially the bees and butterflies love this plant when it's in bloom. It is fragrant. It smells like anise. It's in the Lamiaceae or the mint family, and so it smells kind of like those. So if you brush up against it, you can smell it. It is one of those great ones to even put on, maybe on a walkway where you have to brush against it. Blooms most of the summertime. almost all of the cultivars I've seen are about this color, like this light pink purple. You can do this by seed. There are some new cultivars, some with a little bit darker foliage, a little bit darker blooms. You would divide those or do cuttings if you wanted to propagate those. But a really great one to add into, especially into your butterfly gardens, into those, and also into just even in adding into your perennial gardens. Okay, another one of my stalwarts is Russian sage. They just changed the scientific name on this one. It is now Salvia yangii. And so it used to be Perovskia atroclipifolia, which was super easy to say. So luckily they just brought it into the salvia family, which is, it's a lot like the rest of the salvias, so that's probably a good choice. Height 3 to 5 feet. You can get like baby, I think it's baby denim. There's a couple cultivars that will get only 2 to 3 feet, so you can get a smaller one if that's what you're looking for. It will spread 3 to 5 feet. The larger ones like blue steel. It likes full sun, likes it dry, not a lot of mulch. You don't want to put a lot of mulch on this one. This is one of those you don't divide. It doesn't handle division very well or at all. And this is one of those that if once you've planted it, you want to leave it there. If you don't go decide, oh, I don't like where I put it, I'm going to dig it up in the fall or winter and move it somewhere else. In my experience, most of the time it doesn't come back. You can make it grow a new one from a cutting or from seed and grow it on and plant it in a new spot. But if I try to dig up an old established plant and move it, it often never survives. So before you plant this one, think about where you want it to put. But once you've got it there, unless you dig it up, it's going to be there forever. It is a wonderful plant. Like I said, likes full sun, likes it on the dry side, blooms all summer long, and it will die down. We cut ours on this one. You don't want to cut it clear down to the ground. You don't want to mow it super short or go in with a mower or weed eater to cut it short. You want to leave this one about 6 inches tall. A lot of the foliage, the new shoots will come off of the base. It's a little bit woody at the base, so you don't want to cut it super short. Another, this is the autumn sun coneflower, the Rutabacia laciniata. This one is a tricky. I've planted this several times in the gardens under 2 different names. If you go to the perennial teaching garden, I have it actually twice, because the cultivar is herbstone, which is a German thing, a German cultivar or German, but the variety name is autumn sun. They're actually the same plant, autumn sun and herbstone. It's especially now with a lot of our new cultivars, you can patent a plant, but after 7 years, you lose that patent. But you can trademark the name for a long time. I think it's like 20 years or 10, 20 years. So it's a lot longer than you can patent the plant. And so what a lot of the breeding companies have done is they've given it some crazy, if you look at like knockout rose, the scientific name for knockout rose is Rosa radraz. And the trademark name is knockout rose or knockout red rose or knockout double red. And that way they can trademark the name, but if you sell it without that trademark after the 7 years, you can't sell it under knockout rose. You couldn't sell this one under autumn sun. You'd have to sell it under herbstone coneflower. So this one has 2 names, a little bit of botany knowledge there, but this is a great one. This is a tall one. 5 to 8 feet tall is on this coneflower, but it has almost 0 to no problems. The birds love the seeds. As you see on this picture, the bumblebees and other things love the pollen that this provides. It's a good summer pollen source for them, and really has really nice clean foliage. The foliage is almost all at the base. You'll get about 1 foot to 2 foot of foliage, and then another 4 feet of just stalks with flowers on the end. So it's like almost a columnar appearance in your perennial garden. It adds a nice texture to your perennial garden. And it's a really tough plant with very few problems. It's also easy to maintain. Once it's done blooming, if you don't want to see those naked stems, I usually leave mine up into the fall so the birds can finish off eating all of those seeds on it. And then in the wintertime, I will cut it back down to about 4 to 6 inches tall. But you can, if you want, cut it down to a foot tall and just have that basal floret or where you just see the leaves, and that will look clean and orderly in your garden if you like more of a kept orderly garden as well. Okay, the last one is a grass. That is Pennisetum, and it is fountain grass. A tractor going by, if you can still hear it. The height on these, you can get them from 2 to 3, sometimes up to even 4 feet tall. You can get these in all different types and different, we have some of these is, I think is cattails. We have Marjorie. We have quite a few different cultivars. This is cattails, and it's pretty artistic. This is one cultivar. You can see all of the different colors, the kind of the black, the tans, the grays. We have black seeded fountain grass. It does great as well. They're just really tough plants to put in your perennial garden. They do well. They can handle being mulched. They can handle dry. They can handle some wet. They can, like the black seeded fountain grass, can even handle some a little bit of shade. So really tough plant to have out there in your garden and to add that grass foliage you're wanting to look at. It's going to bloom late in the fall. On these ones, if you're doing a straight species, you can propagate it by seed. Otherwise, you can divide these. I would divide them in the fall or winter time. But a great plant to add into your perennial gardens.